share, and I'll be going through and linking people. I'll be in the background. But hello, 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 everybody. How's everybody doing?
Good.
You guys can hear me and everything?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
we can hear you.
Awesome. So, those of you guys that don't know me, my name is Zach. I am the founder of Star Global College, and kind of cool. I'm super excited. We just hit 1,000,003 students Tuesday. And I'm an industry trainer. We also have Dr. Casey here. I'll let him just say hello real fast.
Hey there, how's it going? I'm Casey. It's very nice to meet you. I look forward to working with you tonight.
Yeah, so you guys are part of the ISO 45001 training for occupational safety, health, and management, a program that is really designed to help kind of push you guys in the career of safety, right? Some of you guys have come through and done our general industry training, which is more built for managers. This is kind of built for people that want to go in and be an executive leader in health and safety. You know, between that middle management level to that executive level, that's what this course is geared for. I want to pause real fast, and what I want you guys to do, if you guys can, it would be cool for you guys to follow our LinkedIn page. There is a big push for us to be at 5,000 by the end of December. We post a lot of job markets, job postings, a lot of things talking about careers, a lot of courses come through here. And overall, I like to put this where we build a network of like-minded individuals that are, really kind of geared towards learning new things. You know, a lot of you guys have come through different programs with us. Some of you I see in the program that have been a part of our school for a while now. ISO 45001 really is geared towards helping you understand quality management practices when it comes to healthcare. Some of you guys have come from our ISO 9001, which focuses on quality management in other industries. You guys have the added benefit tonight. And so this is something that I'm really excited about. So those of you guys that choose the facilitator option, you'll get a facilitator guide. And it just got published Wednesday. So like, of course, I feel like just, I always get really excited when a book gets published. Um, but this is geared towards leading and coaching executives. Even if you don't like, let's just say, Zach, I don't really care about facilitating anything. You know, as a manager and leader, you'll learn a lot more about these activities of ISO. In the chat, I'm going to add the materials. Let me find this real fast.
And Zach, I threw in the case study from Medium. It's just a free article that I put up
Awesome. So yeah,
that will
we'll
follow
probably
along, and it's pretty much the same thing we'll go over. Yeah.
okay.
And the idea
And
behind that is if students want to do some follow up after our session and go back and kind of look through and review the case, they'll be able to.
absolutely. Yeah, you'll probably wind up having to reshare it as you get to that point because some of the students are still joining us a little bit late. But
Oh yeah, no worries. I just wanted to make sure it was. I just wanted to make sure it was already there.
yeah, so but this is the internal auditor training as well. So you're not just learning about ISO 45001, you also will have the ability to be an auditor in here. Again, my name is Dr. Zach Cleghorn. I'm a doctoral researcher and workforce development leader. I specialize in organizational change, change management, quality systems implementation, and I have over 15,000 year or 15,000 years. It feels like that sometimes. 15 years experience in building global training programs. I've worked with Ford, I've worked with Walmart distribution, I've worked with organizations to enhance um, their operation. I specialize in helping people find careers around the world. So basically and essentially, I'll go through and do pre-development training for companies and help guide them into it. I have a background in a variety of different programs, but my specialty is organizational change. So that comes from being a national or an international trainer in Lean Six Sigma. I help write the body of knowledge for Lean Six Sigma and update it in the curriculum. And a lot of these programs you guys come to are also in the workforce as well. Um, I specialize in that because I believe that there's a lot of power in change management practices. So you guys will also have Dr. Casey, and I'll let him get into a little bit of his background here in a little bit. So there's two routes for this program, right? You have the internal auditor certification, and then you have the lead auditor program. You guys have the student materials in there as well. That's basically going to go through and be the biggest one that is the most value to you guys is the lead auditor training because you're going to get the facilitator guide mailed to you. You'll get a facilitator packet, and this qualifies you to teach and certify others in ISO 45001. Essentially, we're giving you a career option and not paying thousands of dollars for it. If you look at the comparison of these pathways, right? Other organizations, they're charging thousands of dollars to you. A lot of times it puts students in debt, really kind of hinders them when they're maybe just starting out or they're trying to move into a different career path. Ours is priced differently because we're a nonprofit organization. uh, Dr. Casey and myself, we're volunteers for this program. And, a lot of us really care about you guys landing careers. And so, when you guys get your career and you get the job, a lot of students post it on LinkedIn and talk about the benefit their organization has had in their lives. Basically, we're delivering professionally grade ISO training at a fraction of the cost. And, uh, regardless if you see this as expensive or not, there's no comparison compared to these organizations. As an ISO auditor, my program cost me upwards of $10,000 to get certified as an auditor and lead trainer in here. We do this because this is a career path that I see ISO professionals going into, not just ISO, but healthcare, manufacturing, banking. And you're basically learning how to implement health and safety practices because overall, if someone gets injured on the job and the company's not doesn't have a program put together that damages the consumer interaction with that company because OSHA posts that on their website. If somebody's getting their arms chopped off in the industry or they're having a lot of accidents, OSHA is going to let the consumers know about that. And they do that and they put it on their website as statistics. Overall, the objectives of this course is, Dr. Casey will go through this slide, but the vision that I have for you guys is to go into these industries and lead organizational change in health and safety management systems. We talk about careers in, let's see if we get to the careers update. I want to share this with you guys, and I'm going to give you a glimpse overview. But students that leave this program, a lot of you guys will go the facilitator route, and you're making upwards of 140 a year just doing consulting with organizations and helping them guide change. You will advise and train organizations on the compliance of ISO 9000 or ISO 45001. We actually have a student is the director of environmental and health and safety for the state of Washington. You guys might know him. That's Dr. Nielsen. He is in there and he is crushing it in that job. Um, Compliance and risk officers, 85,000 to 120,000. This program is directly linked to the internal auditor ISO 45,000 methods. We're going to talk about tonight where you'll be auditing systems, preparing reports, and ensuring continuous improvement. Safety managers and EHS managers. These two are really big ones for students leaving this program. These careers are well over the national average salary for employees. And then lastly, the health and safety coordinator. I see that more of like the general industry. Those of you that went to the general industry 30 training and certification, you got your little card, right? That's kind of like the lower end of where it starts for health and safety. I will tell you, when I got certified in this was a couple years back. I didn't practice this as much, but I would have little jobs with organizations. So, I would go to one example is I went down to Hyster Yale, which they manufacture forklifts. They're a global agency for forklift manufacturing, and we looked at their health and standards, health and safety management systems, and being an auditor in this it taught me how to help revolutionize their process. And, I like to tell students that you shouldn't just come to one thing and learn about it. Uh, this ties into a broader range of certifications at our school that kind of give you a better holistic approach to leading change and leading operations and organizations. And this is a really good opportunity for you because, as you can see, you're not paying thousands of dollars for this. You're essentially doing a uh, you're learning a new career. It takes time. It takes the tenacity, but you can be a consultant. My first I think, a first couple months. It started slower than other programs, but I would go out and audit an organization, and I'd be out there for a week, and they would pay me like $20,000 to just go out there for, what, 20 hours, 30 hours, you know? And I say that not bragging about it, like, look what I done. That's not where I'm coming about. I'm coming from a standpoint of look at the power this can have. You guys, with this, those of you that do the facilitator guide, as I put in the email to you guys will get, I'll mail this book to you. So when it gets time to register for your exam, just make sure you have your correct address on there. I've put the facilitator guide in the chat. Or that, not the facilitator guide. I've put your course materials in the chat. This has a lot of cool little things for you guys to kind of go through and annotate. This is the ISO 45000 book. I'm giving this to you guys for free. So I'm just gonna just kind of eat the cost of that and just order instructor copies, and I'll that way I can save you guys some money instead of paying. I think it's actually 235 on Amazon now, but this uh, essentially will get mailed directly to your house. The only thing is it's an instructor copy, so the only difference is it'll say like not for resale on there. But it's my book. Um, and I would just give it to you guys for free. I'm not really worried about a cost here, just because I really want you guys to land a career in health and safety. So, isn't that cool? Like, I hate mailing things. I will tell you that because it's a pain in the ass. But, uh, I mean, essentially, if you're going to be a facilitator, you need to have some type of guide. And the coolest thing about it is like you're putting 10 years of experience in safety management, and you're going into an organization. So like, for example, like it has like, hey, if you're teaching this class live, um, you could teach a 20-hour program. You'll have notes in here. You'll have facilitator notes. It'll have like discussion questions or like activities your students can use. And it's based off the slides you guys will see here. The coolest thing about it is when you get through, like once you go through the book and you'll get the hang of the book really easy. It's literally foolproof. Each slide it'll have the facilitator notes with it, and at the end of the course, you'll have the ability to certify and give students exams to issue their ISO 45001 certification. Now, that's powerful in itself. I mean, essentially, like you're just getting a career in health and safety here in a couple hours tonight. There's some other good activities here. We have the slide deck that you guys will go through tonight. It might be a little bit different. There were some changes last minute that I wanted to add, but nothing over, like it was more like instructor bio, that type of stuff that I've changed around. I also have where you guys have careers in safety, right? This is also in the book as well, but this kind of goes through, talks about different roles. The reason being is you can type these things into Google and say add job to it. Like, if you said, I want to do a compliance or risk officer job, just put job on it and it's going to point you in the right direction of jobs in your area that you can apply for in Indeed. Tell me that's not freaking cool, guys. It's like the dopest thing. I just get really excited about this because like I'm super passionate about landing you guys jobs. In the last 5 years, Tuesday we hit 1,000,003 students. Last year I sent out a survey to the students, and out of the million, not everybody replied to the survey. 75,000 people applied to that survey, and they're employed in industries now, and they're making over $82,000 a year. Like that's a huge dent in the population, and it just started with putting training together and working in a garage. And now we have a global organization that impacts people in their lives. It's one of I mean, you know, I I do this. I help run this organization as a nonprofit. My everyday job is doing these things we preach and we talk about in these classes. I'll go through and I'll do safety audits. I'll do through and do quality management practices, and I'll teach and certify people in Lean Six Sigma in their projects, among way many other things. But the power you guys are going to get tonight, and even having Dr. Casey, like dude, I can't thank you enough for just coming in here and like being a part of these people's lives, dude. It means so much because you guys, like Dr. Casey, like he knows this stuff. He knows how to lead organizations. And so like pick his brain, on the breaks, ask him questions. Ask him questions after class. You guys are gonna have case studies you're gonna go into that like are literally set up to show you how this applies to the industry. A lot of higher education programs are checks in the box nowadays. It's more about finishing completion rates and getting people out the door. I could give a shit less about you completing it. I more care about, did it help you get a job? Was it a measurable impact in your life? I gotta calm down. I'm getting like super antsy. I'm like getting nervous because I'm so excited. But this is my fourth book that I published this year. I'm super proud of it. Um, there's a bunch of other books that I've also put together, and these go into training, helping you guys lead this. And it's not like I'm doing it where I'm charging you guys an added fee on top of this course. I could give a shit. I'm gonna give this to you guys as soon as you finish your facilitator exam, and it'll be mailed out to you. The books will probably take a month to get to you because they have to order them, and print them and everything like that. So you'll get it within a couple weeks. But the certification you'll get as soon as you get done with the exam tonight, and you'll be certified in it. You guys will become, those of you that do the lead auditor, you'll become lead auditors for Star Global College. Like you will be a representative of our organization and helping kind of connect the pieces. Some of you that complete, I'll probably reach out to when I have industry projects to be like, hey, can you go train this organization? Um, so be active, be involved. Like we would not hire you if you're just sitting there just with a blank screen on and not participating. So like, I mean, this is essentially like, hey, if you want to do this for real, here's the training. We're gonna teach it to you. You're gonna go out and facilitate and guide these organizations. And my job is to connect the dots along the way and land you a career in the industry. I can't promise it because some people suck and they just can't get a job. You guys, if you practice these things we teach and these things that we say and everything, it becomes the ability to kind of guide you into an interview, guide you into how do you consult and with these organizations, and we'll talk about that throughout tonight. Dr. Casey, I'm going to turn things over to you guys tonight. Um, I'm going to turn off the annotation so you guys can't be writing on the screen. But yeah, I look forward to you guys seeing it. I look forward to you guys landing this. Dr. Casey, you're gonna take things off, but I just want to like thank you guys from the bottom of my heart, being here and helping pursue an option for you guys to go into the industry. So thank you guys so much. I'll see you a little bit later tonight. Um, and make sure to pick Dr. Casey's brain, okay? Can everybody promise me they're gonna do that?
All right. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much, Zach. I appreciate the intro and the information. We're gonna have a good time tonight, guys. And I'll give you just a little bit of background about myself, credentials, and then I'll get into some experience that I have in this area specifically. So I'm a board member of an organization that's called Vocational Rehabilitation Management of Illinois. And primarily what that organization is tasked with is helping disabled migrant farm workers to develop job skills that can earn them income because they've been disabled in farm work, which I'm not sure if you know, but it's the second most dangerous occupation in America. Anybody know what the first one is? Any guesses?
Underwater welding.
Uh, I would think be up there. You're not far off. So the water has something to do with it. How about commercial fishing?
Commercial fishing.
Yeah. Ever seen Deadliest Catch? Yeah, a lot of people get hurt, get maimed, get
Bering Street. See,
yeah,
yes.
absolutely. So there's that ranks the highest, but the second is farm work. And so a lot of what I've learned about occupational safety and health and how it ties into the ISO world has been through looking at some of the effects that a lack of safety consideration or negligence has. So we end up with people who are injured that shouldn't be, right? An injury at the workplace shouldn't happen. A person shouldn't go to work and feel unsafe and experience unsafe or unhealthy conditions, right? We talk about that not just because we want to be ISO compliant or compliant with the law. We talk about that because that's what basic human dignity dictates. We want to give people a dignified environment to do their work because you're not going to get productive work out of people that you're not treating with dignity, plain and simple. If you don't learn anything else tonight, learn that, right? Because that will serve you, right? The other thing that I would say that goes along with it is we all have something to learn from one another. And nobody has a monopoly on knowledge or information. I have a lot of experience. I have a lot of credentials. I've been in the game for a while. That doesn't mean that I know everything. And the minute that I say that I do is when I should relinquish all of my credentials, because what you get to at the end of the road, or as you get closer to, there is no end, but as you get closer uh, on the journey, what you start to realize is you know less about specific areas, you know less about general areas, and there's some stuff you just don't know anything about at all, and that's okay, right? As long as you're willing to admit it, because that means that you're able to identify your weak spots and find ways that you can account for them, right? Build community with people. Some people are just going to be better, right, in certain areas. So building community, diversifying the skill sets of the people that you're working with or on the team that you're on, those are all kind of important. So I've worked with migrant populations. I've also worked with neurodivergent individuals, so that the health angle that I'm coming at tonight comes from experience, PTSD, lots of other neurodivergent conditions. And finally, I'm going to be talking a little bit about veterans, because I know a lot of people in here are veterans or veteran adjacent. You might be a spouse or you might be a family member of a veteran. And of course, there's a lot of danger in that occupation, and the aftermath, the transition, especially with mental health support and having partnerships. That's really been the onus for the organization that I serve as strategic advisor for. It's a nonprofit organization called the Veteran to Project Manager Mentorship Alliance, or the VPMMA. And you might want to write that down, because we offer a couple of things that should be of interest to you. First off, we offer mentorship with Coaches. So I'm a mentor. We have several people that have military experience, that have academic experience, training experience, right? Several of us are certified workforce development professionals. Many of us have project management, agile, Lean Six Sigma credentials. And so you get to pick your brain. I think the average mentor or mentee commits to about 10 hours for that relationship every month, right? And then in addition to that, there are projects where you can get experience, grants, things that we're doing for communities, and access to the entirety of Google's professional certification suite at no cost. Right, that's something that Google has gifted the organization, and all you have to do is sign up, and you'll have access to that. And then the final thing I'll say about the VPMA is they also have an arrangement with the creator of Vet Mentor AI, and that's an AI application that is designed specifically to facilitate VA claims and help people who are dealing with disability, dealing with things that happen during their occupation in the military. And this has a just wait, Stuart, just wait. I'll tell you what's even bigger. So the organization I'm discussing is the Veteran to Project Manager Mentorship Alliance, or the VPMMA, and I'll put that in chat. Or if you find me on LinkedIn, you'll see that I'm on the board of directors. So the organization has access to Vet Mentor AI, and Stuart said, man, that's big. It is big. Let me tell you why it's even bigger than you might think. This app has a 92% success rate with VA claim acceptance on the first iteration. And if you've ever filed a VA claim, the human success rate is somewhere around 35, 36%, right? So this is adding some oomph. And I'm not smart enough to know all the details about how that's working, but my understanding, based on the description given to me by the CEO, is that the AI that the Veterans Administration uses speaks better to another AI agent than it does a human being. So please keep those organizations in mind. And I'll give you a little bit of a reminder about it. I'm also on the Wisdom Council of the Neurodiversity Foundation in Holland. And we do a lot of advocacy for Neurodiversity Pride Day. It's June 16th every year. We also do a lot of advocacy for workplace training, addressing the skills cliff that a lot of people with neurodivergent conditions experience upon high school graduation. What happens is a lot of times their support infrastructure, their 504 plans, their IEPs, those go out the window, and they don't have the support that they're accustomed to. And sometimes that causes some difficulty with career transition. It causes unemployment, underemployment, homelessness, substance abuse. And we try to get involved in that. And we also have several sensory room projects that we have completed. Very low cost sensory regulation areas that help to deal with some of the psychological stress that we'll talk about tonight, and give neurodivergent folks a place just to kind of get back into their own heads, right? And I'm neurodivergent myself. I have ADHD and PTSD and a bunch of other Ds, and having just some space to breathe and orient is incredibly helpful. And so I got the idea from a trip to Six Flags St. Louis. They had a sensory room there, and I thought, man, if they can do this, we can. And when you start looking into that, the design consultants charge you around $30,000. Our plan and our budget, which is freely available, all you have to do is ask, and I'll send it to you with the project management plan, the sustainability plan, everything else you need, and training, for free as a PDF. We can get all that done for $681. All you have to do is raise $681. And a lot of it's using recycling, using sustainability principles, repurposing things. So if we have, say, a bag of beans that has a cloth cover, it serves the same function as a weighted blanket would, right? So thinking innovatively, and that's kind of a nice dovetail into tonight, because when we think about health and safety, we often think about retroactive, right? What are we going to do? How are we going to respond to a potential lawsuit? How long is the person going to be out of work, right? On the front end, we might think of it as risk. But I want us to think about risk, and this is something we can apply to all of the ISOs, because they're all based in the same plan, do, check, act cycle, and that's about quality, right? So it's not just avoiding risk; it's capitalizing on opportunities to improve quality, which isn't the end, right? That's a middle step because ultimately what you're trying to do by improving quality, and we'll define that as customer satisfaction, you're trying to improve value, right? And that value hopefully is going to be something that your people who are consuming your services or goods recognize and promote among their friends, and something that we call our net promoter score. So this is an end-to-end way to create value for your organization, right? It's not just about avoiding the money that you're going to spend in a lawsuit. It's not just about being compliant. It's about using occupational safety and health to create a culture where people feel valued so that they can produce value, right? And we've all probably had experience in one shape or form where we maybe didn't feel as valued. My very first job, I was, well, that's not true. My very second job, my first job was 4 hours of washing dishes at Walmart, and dishwasher temperatures, that water that comes out of commercial dishwashers, it's got to be about 500 degrees hotter than the surface of hell. And I couldn't do it. So my second job was a stock boy in a department store, and I was 15 years old. And sometimes the baler that baled the cardboard boxes up would get stuck. And they would give us a mop handle and send us down the baler and tell us to put one work boot on each side of the wall and push while they push the button on, right? And I grew up in an area that was economically depressed. I'm from Appalachia. And if you didn't do it, somebody else would, right? And you needed that money. So a lot of times people were taught to sacrifice their own safety at the expense of losing their job, right? And that's not the kind of culture that we want to create, because first off, people don't produce well when they're terrified. And secondly, we again have an obligation to preserve dignity, right? When we talk about value creation, we're not just talking about dollar terms. We're talking about the value that we're creating for society, for the world, for our workers, right? So moving into this just a little bit, I have some general questions, just an overview, and this is kind of a high-level sketch of the ISO, just to give you a decent overview of what's included and what we'll go into in a few more specific details with the case tonight. Any questions before we begin? Okay. One point of clarification that I would like to make here, we're talking about occupation safety and health. And a lot of folks might say, okay, that sounds like OSHA territory. What's the relationship between this ISO and OSHA? Well, OSHA certification is mandatory, right? The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, a federal regulatory agency, mandates compliance with their standards. Whereas ISO is voluntary. However, it sends a pretty big signal in industry that you care about quality if you go through the process of becoming ISO accredited. This also gives you evidence in a court proceeding that you have taken health and safety seriously and you have done all you can to address it in the event, God forbid, something happens, right? I would much rather go to court and say, hey, I've been through ISO training. I have looked and identified risk in health and safety and ways to improve the quality of our procedures to control those. That's something you want to be able to say in court, as opposed to, well, I never really looked into it. Right? I did the bare minimum. We got OSHA certified, but we didn't put this into our strategy. This didn't become part of our overall value delivery mechanism. So that's what I want you to be thinking about, is how can we take this thing that we often consider to be a burden, right? It's bureaucracy, it's red tape, it's all these things, but only if we make it, right? Like anything else in life, we can take this something that maybe seems like it's scary and turn it into an opportunity to learn, to gain confidence, and to gain competence. And when we do that, the scariest things in the world aren't scary anymore, right? Often, the most common source of fear is just a lack of familiarity, right? And that's something that we are capable of overcoming. And you're demonstrating that by giving up your Sunday night to be here with me, right? So give yourself a little bit of credit, give yourself some ups, because there's a lot of people watching football right now. There's a lot of people drinking beer. There's a lot of people out getting the last few laps on the lake that they can before it gets too cold. And you're sitting here with me. God help you. I'll try to make it worth your while. So let's think about what health and safety really mean. I'm going to give you the definition from the ISO, and then we'll play with this notion and see what we can discern about it. There you go. Invest in yourself 100%. Nobody else is going to. So the first thing that we want to look at is the definition. Conditions and factors that affect or could affect. And notice here, we're not just talking about things that are actively causing health and safety concerns. We're talking about things that could. And if you're familiar with Lean, you're familiar with Six Sigma, what you might notice here is this is an opportunity where we might begin to look at failure modes. We might begin to look at root cause analysis so that we can get a better idea of where the source of those failures or where the source of those gaps are coming from, right? So it also should tell us it's not a one-time process. This is ongoing. This is continuous. This isn't a box that you check once a year, because different things that could affect health and safety are going to change, right? We're going into, in the Midwest, we're going into a colder season. There's going to be a lot more ice. There's going to be more snow. There tend to be more car accidents, more injuries, people slipping on sidewalks, people having heart attacks from shoveling snow, that sort of thing. Those aren't going to be the same conditions that we're trying to be responsive to in the summertime. So if we use our summertime strategy, or we only have one pair of pants, right, it's not going to fit for all seasons. So we're not trying to leave here tonight with the answer, the one best way. If you came here tonight for that, I'm really sorry. I'm going to disappoint you. Instead, what I'm going to give you is perspective that will help you to acquire an answer. And I'll start with the fact that though we're talking about a standard, the reason that standard exists is so we can tailor to our specific contextual needs around the standard's requirements, right? In other words, the standard isn't an inhibitor. The standard is part of how we're shaping our activities, right? So we certainly want to standardize some things, but we do that so that we have more license for discretion in other areas. A lot of times we think of it as either or a trade-off. And dichotomous thinking, whether we're talking about it in the context of occupational safety and health or anything else, dichotomous thinking is dangerous, right? Nothing is always or never happening, right? And there's often a lot more room for nuance than we tend to think, right? So I want you to be nuanced thinking. Think about risk as opportunity, especially when it comes to this ISO, because I would want to work at a place that valued my health and created a safe working environment. And I imagine the rest of us would too, right? I hope to God I never have to go back to working in a stock room where they give me a mop handle and tell me to go down the baler, because my fat ass would not get out in time, right? I was a little quicker about 30 years ago, and good beer and donuts kind of did their job on me. So I don't want that work anymore. And most of us would want to go into a place where we feel valued. And if I feel safe, I'm much more likely to feel valued. And if I don't feel valued and I feel safe, I can express my opinion more easily, right? So we're talking about creating conditions for everybody in the organization to be involved. We're not talking about somebody from the top or somebody from an audit team coming in and telling you how to be healthy and safe. We're talking about this as part of your everyday job, right? Something that should go into the considerations that you're making for every other facet of your job, right? Not because you're concerned about compliance or getting sued. Those are important, right? But you also have a professional obligation. You also have an obligation to the organization. And maybe you have an obligation to yourself, right? Because a lot of times the things that lead to health and safety trouble are things that we ourselves could have prevented. Right? We act too quickly. We don't think. We don't ask another person. We think, oh, I will bother somebody if I ask them. I'll give you just a little bit of an example of that recently, and this didn't result in anything terrible, but I was doing a food bank volunteer event in Morton, Illinois, so in the center of Illinois around Peoria. And we had used up all of the contents because we were putting together rice and bean kits for disaster relief. And it was an assembly line. So there was one person would scoop the powder, one person would scoop the beans, one person would scoop the rice. Well, We ran out of textured vegetable protein, which I'm still not sure what it is, but anyway, we ran out of it, and I had to go refill the tote. And I thought, man, I'm a big, strong person. I can carry this huge 20-gallon tote full of textured vegetable protein. Well, I didn't get to find out if I could carry it because the only way to fill it was to hold it up in the air and hold the handle that dispensed with one hand and the tote with the other. And I'll save you guesswork, and you can imagine what ensued. I was sweeping textured vegetable protein off the floor for probably the next 15 minutes, right? While everyone looked at me and rolled in the floor laughing at me. So part of it is knowing that we're part of a community and it's okay to ask for help, right? So when you see a box that says, hey, this is a team lift, that's not a suggestion, right? It's an invitation to co-produce value together, right? And in doing that little stuff, right, lifting boxes together, helping each other out, you develop trust. Right? When we're talking about health and safety, we're not just talking about physical. We're also talking about your mental and your social well-being, right? What comes to mind for you guys when you hear safety? What just jumps out at you when you hear that word? Anybody think of the hospital?
Hospital preparation, OSHA, manufacturing, where there's dangerous environments that you have to pay attention to detail very closely and have great situational awareness so you don't lose a body part or lose
There
your
you
life.
go. You're on to
Re-
something.
Reducing the organization's liability by reducing the level of safety incident that may happen.
Okay, so what we want to do is reduce our exposure to legal liability by preventing things on the front end, right? It's a whole lot easier to prevent something than it is to clean it up after. And Ben Franklin told us that, didn't he? He said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. You're absolutely right, Trevor. So when we talk about this, a lot of times when I talk to people, I'm training people, I'm going out and doing audits, what I hear from people is, we don't have big catastrophic failures. We don't have explosions. We don't have people getting limbs lopped off, right? That stuff does happen. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, seen it working with disabled migrants, more often are insidious, less visible forms of safety, right? And the problem with this is we might not recognize them until it's too late. If we're not looking for them, we might not see them, right? Everybody can see an explosion. What we can't see is somebody gradually developing, say, back problems in a shop floor situation. So we're looking here not just at catastrophe, we're also looking at smaller concerns. And then how about health? What I want to draw your attention to here is this ISO doesn't just talk about physical health, right? And I come from Appalachia, where people's physical health was often disregarded in the mines, right? We don't talk just about physical health, though. We're talking here about your psychological well-being. We're talking about your mental health. We're talking about the health with which you are engaging in social interactions, right? That is, you're not being bullied, you're not being abused or hurt by other people at work. And one thing that I see is a lot of times people think about broken limbs, or they think about missing limbs, or they think about people being in a body cast. And my best story about someone in a body cast was my friend Benny Joe. He, God help him, he was in a construction accident that landed him in a body cast. And he refused pain medicine on principle. And instead, he would drink White Lightning. So he had him jars and jars of moonshine. And it was easy to get in the mountains. And I remember watching Mad Max in the Thunderdome with this guy in his body cast about halfway through a jar of moonshine. And he said, it's ass kicking time, and the asses will kick. Now, I still don't know what that means, but this is something that we could see visibly. But if he had had a broken heart, or if he had a mental illness, or if he had some other condition, like say a neurodivergent condition that required regulatory support, those things might not be as apparent. Right? And if we don't look for them, if we're not cognizant of them, right, then we might not notice them. Similarly, we have predominantly throughout history had a white male workforce. So a lot of the accommodations and a lot of the things that we can do to bring health and safety are from the perspective of white males. I'll give you an example. A local organization, it's a public organization in my town, had a public debate about whether to have a lactation space. And then it dawned on them that this was actually a state legal compliance issue, not a choice. That's how far behind they were on the issue, right? So we're talking not just about having a safe and healthy workplace in the sense of people going home safely and having physical health. We're talking about them feeling like they belong, right? Because when you provide infrastructure like a sensory room or a lactation room, when you provide that stuff, you're sending the signal to people that they matter to you, right? I care enough about you that I want you to feel healthy and safe where you work. Now, I might not be able to pay you much more. I might not be able to give you a new company car every year, but what I can do is commit to doing my best to make you feel like you belong at the workplace, right? And if I can't do that, find a better employer, plain and simple. And that's the mindset we want to have going into this. People matter, right? This isn't about ISOs. This isn't about some organization in Europe that regulates internationally on these standards. This is about every day going to work and feeling like you are appreciated, you belong, you're safe, you can voice your opinion, you don't have to engage in dangerous practices to keep your job, right? There's a lot to be said about that we might just take for granted. Is it possible, and this is not a question I know that I expect you to have an answer for per se, it's just something I've been thinking of. Is it possible to be safe at work and not healthy? Or is it possible to be healthy but not safe? The reason
Yes,
I ask that, I'm sorry, Trevor, please.
I would say yes. You can be safe, and that all depends on situations. But not healthy because you don't know what's working under, let's say, what's in the ceiling, what's under the walls, how old the building. So you can feel safe, but then inadvertently still not be healthy or not feel healthy due to unforeseen things that are there safety wise that people are not really paying attention to on a daily basis or a monthly basis.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Someone else in chat had mentioned a response. They said, yes. Tell me more.
It just reminds me of recently, I'm in New England, there was an incident at a hospital, and it was a hospital where multiple nurses came up with some form of cancer. They all worked in the radiation department over a period of years, and they were safe. They felt they were safe working in that environment. And then years later, things are popping up. These are nurses, they all worked in the same department.
Man. So, yeah, it might be that you're temporarily safe, or at least under the auspices of it, and then you have health competence that comes up. And I think, Trevor, what you're getting to me, or community acquired, where we lived through COVID, all of us, and yeesh. But I think what you're getting to, Trevor, is health and safety are independent phenomena, right? They're complementary. They certainly work together, but they're not the same thing, right? When we're talking about safety and health, we're talking about separate but interrelated concepts. So what's our first dimension? What's our first dimension of health and safety? How about physical health and safety, right? This is the one, again, that comes to mind. We're trying to think of hazards. So a hazard would be noise, slips, machinery, chemical exposure, ergonomics, right? If we get carpal tunnel after 25 years of typing on a QWERTY keyboard, right, that sort of thing. So you might look at your workplace and you might say, are there any physical hazards? Now, hopefully, when I ask you that, you say, no, Dr. LaFrance, the workplace that I am employed at takes this stuff seriously, and we don't have any hazards whatsoever. Is that the case? You don't have to tell me. I'm going to see a bunch of no's, and the reason I'm going to see no is it's impossible, isn't it? Tell me more, Trevor.
I mean, there's always going to be, physical hazards, no matter how safe or how safe an environment may be perceived. Okay, it could be something as simple as getting off of an elevator that didn't line up properly, and someone trips, or someone mopping the floor didn't put the wet sign down, or whatever the case may be. It can cause that safety condition. Or
Absolutely.
maybe it rained and someone brought their wet umbrella in, and and the person that came in after, the custodian didn't notice that, and they didn't put anything out to warn anyone. So it's a lot of variations when it comes to safety, and a lot of hazards can happen at a second or a moment's notice due to conditions and changes.
Absolutely. And again, there's stuff that's more visible and less visible, not just with health, when it comes to safety. And someone in chat said, hey, there might be mold in the vents that we don't see, but it's going to have effects on us, right? So what we're talking about here in a broader sense is we're never going to be able to account for every possible risk. We're just not, right? We're not going to be able to address every safety concern. And the great thing about this training and the great thing about the real world is you don't have to, right? Nobody can, because we operate with bounded rationality. We're human beings. In order to account for every possible risk, we would first have to know out of an infinite number of risks, all of them, and then be able to rank them and prioritize them perfectly, right? We don't have that capacity, not even with artificial intelligence, which, by the way, the guy that came up with that body of theory, bounded rationality and satisficing, was a guy named Herbert Simon, who went on to win a Nobel Prize in computer science for his contributions to AI, specifically large language models, prototypical models like ChatGPT, right? So he recognized that humans had limitations, and he said, maybe we can do something with technology to augment that capacity. And we're seeing that to a certain extent. But that still doesn't make us omniscient, right? Unless anyone in this room happens to be God. We're not going to be omniscient. We're also not going to be omnipresent. We can't be everywhere at once. Even if we know it all, we can't be everywhere at once to do something about it, right? And maybe most importantly, we're not omnipotent. We're not all powerful to control risk, right? So Trevor, you're absolutely right. It could be raining. It could be a tornado. It could be a natural disaster of some other sort. It could be some equipment malfunction that's due to a manufacturer error. We're never going to be able to account for that stuff. And that doesn't mean I want you to go crawl into a hole and hide and try to be safe. What it means is I want you to recognize that this isn't compliance for the sake of compliance. This isn't an exercise in what could possibly go wrong and let's have doomsday scenarios. This is, what are the things that are most likely to affect us based on past experience? What are the things that are industry specific? What are the things that are going to matter in 5 years, 10 years, right? And we have some calculations involved in the ISO that can help us with risk, right? We can score risk by creating an RPN, or we can use a risk likelihood matrix, looking at the likelihood of something occurring and the severity of that if it were to occur, right? So there's lots of ways we can account for that, but I don't want you to feel stymied. I want you to instead feel empowered, because yeah, you can't anticipate every risk, but you can respond with a solid methodology to every health and safety risk that you do encounter. And that's where the empowerment should come from, right? You are going to be a person who faces some situations where people are feeling maybe a little bit overwhelmed, maybe a little bit in crisis, right? Part of the value of this training is it gives you the ability to have templates, to have forms, to have methods that you can apply even in a crisis. Because if you're like me, when you're in a crisis, you don't think that well, right? It's difficult to develop an original response. So I don't want you to think of this ISO training as the best way to do it always. What I want you to think of it is things that you ought to consider in coming up with the way that works for you to avoid nonconformities, to demonstrate compliance, and to create a culture of health and safety, right? Tailored to your specific needs. Right? A barbershop would not have the same health and safety considerations as an auto mechanic, though some of those would be common. And one of those is going to be physical safety, including hazards. So we can't account for every hazard, but if there are known hazards, right, we can do a lot to mitigate or reduce the likelihood of those hazards causing negative outcomes with safety and health. That's why we see the signs that tell you that the floor is wet after it's been mopped. Right? So we can engage in some proactive preventative efforts, and that's what this ISO is really all about. It's not about how do you respond once you've dropped the ball. It's about how do you prevent these things from happening to the extent possible, right? And then there are going to be things that we call force majeure. There are going to be things that are acts of God that are outside of any human being's control. And nobody is asking you to take on anything that's outside of your control. What we're instead asking is that you open your mind to be able to see how a methodology can be applied to problems that you don't even know exist yet, right? I'll give you a little bit of a silly example, but this ought to hit home with you. You ever been to the Goodwill or the Salvation Army looking at the used clothes racks and you find something? Maybe it's the wrong season. Maybe you can't think of an event that you're going to wear it for anytime coming up, but man, you buy it anyway. Why? Because you know you're going to have the opportunity, right? So think about this as your safety suit, right? You want to wear it. You want to make sure it still fits. You want to walk around in it, stretch it out, right? And you want to always have it so that you can throw it on when you need it, just like you would that item that you bought. Okay? And there's something comforting, something familiar, because over time, that safety suit that this represents turns into a nice, snuggly fall hoodie. And it's definitely the time of the year for nice, snuggly fall hoodies if you are living in the Midwest. Maybe not in the South just yet. I'm from Georgia, and I never knew what winter was until I moved to the Midwest. I showed up with a windbreaker like Rocky Balboa, and had to go buy a coat because I was freezing. So, physical hazards, we've talked about some of them. Which ones do you think are so routine they might get overlooked? Like, do you have a switch you have to jiggle? Do you have a door that you have to kind of kick to get it to open? Do you have a lock that doesn't really lock? You got anything like that in your workplace? Or something that's just on the cusp of kicking the bucket at any moment?
Maybe an electrical outlet that don't work, or it's like the spark.
Sure. Or it might not be
Things like that.
grounded because it was the building code for our buildings that we work in was maybe 1940, 1930, right? I used to live in a house that was built in 1925, and if you're familiar with wiring from 1925, it was knob and tube. And knob and tube wiring is it was grandfathered in, right, because it had already been installed, but it's incredibly dangerous. And every time I went to plug something in that house, an outlet would either spark or a fuse would blow or some other tragedy would occur. So I was scared. I was scared to plug stuff in. I had too many things blow up in that house. So it could be stuff that we see every day, and the mentality that gets us into trouble is saying, "I will fix that tomorrow." Oh gosh, I need to do that, but I don't want to today, or I don't have time today. Make time, right? Because it's going to cost you a whole lot more than the time that it's going to take to address it when you're in court or when you're dealing with employees who are dissatisfied or don't feel like they can trust you. Okay? Because ultimately, what we're talking about here isn't just whether your customers know that you're producing quality products in a safe way with an ethical sourcing and supply chain mechanism and value stream mechanism in place. They're also going to know that you treat your workers like human beings, right? I don't know that I want to buy a product from a company that treats people as anything less than human beings with full dignity. Right? What are some ways that you see health and safety as a visible feature of the workplace? And there's some obvious ones, right? You can think about your exit signs for the fire doors. You can think about lots of other different mechanisms, for instance, the elevator weight capacity, or even the labels on doors. Fire alarms are a great example. At my university, my day job, I teach at the university, and you should come and study with me in my graduate program. I teach nonprofit management, public administration, organization theory. At my university, to access the classroom from the outside hallway, you have to open the door outward. You don't push the door in. Why? Well, in the event of a fire, a vacuum is created that makes it much more difficult to open the door that way than to open the door as an egress. Right? Little stuff like that we don't even notice. Right? We can look at anything in our pocket, and there's going to be a government label on it that tells us what it's made of, where it was made. Right? Where we might get into trouble is when we get into some unregulated sort of supplements that the FDA hasn't approved, right? But generally speaking, we get some indications signaling that health and safety are important. Your expired fire extinguisher, that's a great example. So you can also see evidence of laziness, evidence of a lack of spirit or safety culture, and that might be seeing expired equipment, or seeing that scheduled drills aren't being done, or seeing that there isn't risk mitigation being put in place for events that are very severe and very likely. There are all kinds of different ways that we can look into that. How about mental and psychosocial health? And remember, these are less visible. You can't look at somebody with a mental illness and see the same way that you would be able to someone who was wearing the body cast watching Mad Max and the Thunderdome, right? What are some of these that we ought to think about? Well, the first that comes to mind, the one that we experience mostly, I think everybody in this room at some point, hopefully not all the time, but at some point you've experienced some workplace stress, right? Workplace stress, if left unchecked, can grow. It can cause stress in the rest of your life. It can cause some other areas of your life to become lower quality. How about fatigue? Mental fatigue. You ever just get so tired at work of making decisions that when you get home, you can't even figure out what you want to eat? You want somebody to show up and just say, hey, here's what you're having for supper, buddy. So you have one fewer decision that you have to make, right? We all know that. Burnout. Burnout comes when we keep pushing our head up against a tree and we don't feel like we're making progress. Burnout comes when we give too much of ourselves without replenishing ourselves, right? So if we are creating a culture where you're encouraged to work overtime and frequently, and encouraged to otherwise abandon your needs, whether that's for bathroom breaks or food or sleep, right? And for some of us, right, yeah, the commute itself before we even get to the office takes a lot of us. And then after work, right, you're still not done with work because you have to navigate back home, whether you're driving or riding public transportation. Cramming for finals, oh my goodness. I hope I don't ever have to take another final exam, but my gosh, cramming for things like my Master Black Belt exam or the PMOCP exam, goodness, that is definitely some stress. How about harassment? That affects our mental well-being and our social well-being. If people are looking at us and singling us out for differential treatment based on some kind of characteristic, right? We don't like that. We don't like being harassed, and we don't deserve to be harassed, and it's illegal for us to be harassed, right? But instead of addressing issues of harassment when they occur on a case-by-case basis, what if we could create and engender a community that didn't tolerate, right? And why is that important? When we talk about these ISOs, we're talking about certifying organizations. Why do we want to certify organizations and not individuals? Well, we often hear about bad apples. But when we look at the organization, sometimes we see bad barrels, right? Organizations that perpetuate or allow unsafe or unhealthy activity to occur, right? Without any sort of consequence. So when we see that that is being allowed to occur, the organization is creating conditions. Maybe they're asking us to work without sufficient sleep or food. Maybe they're asking us to do too much, right? When we see those things, it can make us feel isolated. It can make us feel alone at work, right? Because we're not feeling like we're valued. We're not feeling like we're part of a team, right? So if you want to think about this as just avoiding lawsuits, you can. But if you want to think about it as creating a culture where people feel like they belong and can contribute to value creation, I think that's a better way to look at it, right? Or at least a way that gives you more perspective than we traditionally see. Why does all this stuff matter, this psychological and social stuff? Well, what effects does it have? Think about when you're burnt out. Think about when you have decision fatigue. Right? We have more choices in our lives at any point in human history. There's a guy named Barry Schwartz that wrote a book called The Paradox of Choice. And he says, we like the idea of choice, at least ostensibly. We like the idea of variety because it means we might get something that is the closest approximation of what we really want. Oh, I'm not meaning to share my screen. I'm just talking to you. We'll get to the screen share in just a second. Sorry, Zach said, you're not sharing your screen. I said, no, I'm just talking. We're going to get to the presentation and the case study. I just wanted to get this stuff kind of laid out so that we can refer back to it. So when we think about these factors, what we're talking about is people might not come back to work. We might not retain them. We might not engage them. If I don't go out of my way to create safe work conditions, am I going to be able, as an employer, as a manager, to expect you to go out of your way for me? No. Respect, dignity, trust, those are two-way streets. You might think in this area, what are some factors that increase this sort of psychological stress? Well, how about impossible deadlines, impossible standards, vague instructions, last minute meetings? We know what we're talking about here. Every single one of us has a master class in this just from experiencing what we didn't like. Right? Everything we learned about occupational safety and health, to be honest with you, is something we've already learned in kindergarten. Right? Absolutely, Trevor. That is military life. Why do we care so much about open communication? Why am I harping on this? Is it because I'm squishy and I think we should all hug and stand by a fire? No, not necessarily. It's because open communication is what is necessary for each of us to say, oh gosh, I noticed that too. That is an issue. And as soon as we start communicating with one another, a funny thing tends to happen. Once we start communicating with each other, we start to observe themes. We start to observe common issues. And remember that isolation that we talked about? It begins to go away because we feel like we are part of a community that values our health and safety. Social and organization safety. Here we're talking about trust and the amount of decision authority and capacity that you have. How much wiggle room you are given based on your manager trusting you. How inclusive are we? Are we making sure to deal with communication? And here I would say people want to add value to organizations all the time, and they talk about value stream mapping, and they hire consultants like me to come in. I'll give you the biggest source of log jams, of bottlenecks for free. There are two of them. One is intake, right? Because if you don't have a standardized intake process. Everything's flawed from the get-go. And the second most common area that I see flaws and bottlenecks and work in progress pile up is with handoffs. Right? When I'm handing my work off to the next department, the next unit, the next person on the line, I don't always communicate in a way that makes sense to them. I have a different specialty, I have a different focus. And if I'm not careful to communicate, if I'm not careful that we're on the same page, we might drop the ball. And that's why this ISO exists, to give us this common language, right? In a lot of ways, it's like the Star Trek Universal Translator. I can understand the Romulans or the Klingons or whoever else I have to work with, right? It also encourages shared accountability. And again, if we're all invited to voice our opinions, that means on the back end, we all have a responsibility for maintaining the safety culture that we're creating. And I think that's pretty powerful, right? I'm going to ask you a question that is in this vein. I have a couple of them. First is, most of us, I would imagine, work on teams, at least in some way, shape, or form. What do you see on your team that contributes to or inhibits safety outcomes? Anybody see any groupthink? Groupthink being the desire for consensus, the desire to not rock the boat. Do you see any of that? I see a lot of it. Or we might see de-individuation, right? So Trevor says safety is everyone's responsibility. I agree wholeheartedly. What happens, though, in the context of an organization is we often lose sight of our individual responsibility because we think of ourselves as part of something bigger, right? And the problem with that is if we de-individuate and depersonalize, then we end up saying that person or someone else will take care of this, right? And it's a parallel in some respects to the bystander effect from social psychology. It's named after an event where a woman was raped and murdered in an alley. And she was screaming for help, and several people heard her, but no one went to her rescue because they believed someone else would.
Because no, I think the organization may have lacked in that situation the ability to train their employees with bystander training so they know what to do in a situation like that. Because many people assume that someone will help someone in need, but if they're
Absolutely.
not trained or conditioned into that mindset, that they're not going to react. Just like an active shooter situation.
There you go. You're absolutely, and it's odd that you mentioned that. So the murder that we're talking about happened in an alley in New York City. So the organization we're talking about is the community, right? And you're absolutely right. The diffusion of responsibility grows as the number of people around, right? It's the same as doing the dishes or taking the trash out. If you have a large family, then you might be less likely to do it because somebody else will do it, right? If you live alone, nobody else is going to take that trash out, buddy. You got to go do
Well,
it yourself, right?
and now, of course, in the community situation, we'll go back to liability. Okay, if someone helps someone, and let's say that person get hurt in the in the interim, and then even though you might have saved their life, whatever, they turn around and sue you because they figured like, oh, if you hadn't done what you did, I wouldn't have gotten hurt. So of course,
And
there's
it's
that
a great
factor in
point that you
place.
bring up. That was the case for several years, Trevor. In most jurisdictions, especially at the state level, what we've seen is the passage of what we call Good Samaritan laws. And it's exactly to cover those situations where I want to help somebody, but I don't want to, say, move them off the street and end up paralyzing them and then being liable, right? So if you're trying to use your best intentions and professional judgment, you're less likely to be liable, though liability and which judge you get and which jury you get and what they had for breakfast is still up in the air. So I would much rather avoid it on the front end, right? And so, yeah, the reason we have bystander training is we realize that sometimes what can happen is we diffuse responsibility in an organization or in a community because we're expecting other people to step up. And that's a pretty big lesson here, right? If we're expecting everybody else to step up and identify and work to improve health and safety, nobody's going to, right? So it either has to be nobody's job or it has to be everybody's job. And if we're going to get it done, it seems like the only effective way might be to make it everybody's job. Right?
I have something to add to that. Different states varies on those Good Samaritan laws, and
Tell us about that, Mark.
I mean, the biggest concerns is, you as a person that says, well, I'm going to take the initiative, or I'm going to apply myself and save that young lady that was being raped, or the young boy that was, I guess he was a lifeguard, and he tried to save, I guess, a little baby, a little girl from drowning, and he had to deal with all that lawsuit and all those dramas. And then when you think back, it's like, wow, I'm just young, I'm trying to help, or I mean, is it really worth all of this? Taking the initiative and saving somebody's life. It's not that I don't want to, but it's the headache behind it. At the same time, is the regrets of not doing it. So most people is in that gray area of, well, I'm just gonna wait and see if somebody else taking that leap of faith.
Sure. And we might do it wrong, right?
Right,
Most of
wrong,
the time,
indifference. Life
oh,
is
no,
life, right? But let's just
there you
use it
go.
at a workplace. Something as simple as, hey, I see something on the floor, and I'm gonna say something about it. Whereas most people be like, well, that's not my job.
Great point. And I would say here, if we're gonna go back to your point, Mark, say something's on the floor, we're gonna point it out. It's not just that we're doing that one time. It's that we're training ourselves to look beyond the one situation, and we're looking for evidence of action. So, and that's exactly where I'm going with this. We talk about the road to hell being paved with good intentions, right? The road out of hell, or the way to avoid hell, at least in the context of this ISO, is through understanding what your limits are and understanding what your procedures are, right? So that you never have a situation, or at least you have fewer situations that don't have at least some general response that you're going to be implementing. But again, I've worked in some situations across the public sector and nonprofit sector where it depends was the right answer. And I think it depends is often the right answer in this work. So I can't tell you that there are ironclad things that you should or shouldn't do. And at the end of the day, it's going to come down to what your organization has decided and how they want to shape compliance, right? And I would say the big point to make about that is, if there are people who are experts around, let them do their job, right? I was at the Drury Inn. I don't know if you've ever been to a Drury Inn, but the reason I liked it was they gave you like nachos and hot dogs for free between like 4 and 6, right? And I'm cheap. And then I wanted a hot dog. So I went down to the Drury Inn mingle, and it was a little social mingle. People are eating hot dogs and nachos, and they're not very good, but they're free, right? All of a sudden, this fella, he had to be about 80 years old and about 80 pounds soaking wet. He starts choking on a hot dog. Nobody does anything. So I get up and I grab the guy and I shake him like a rag doll, and I get the hot dog out with the Heimlich, right? It comes out. But I'm thinking, man, what if I hadn't been able to get it out and I just ended up like choking the guy to death, right? So yeah, I think there's always a consideration. There's always risk reward, but we can be guided by our practice. And that's why having practice, having regular risk analysis scenarios, regularly walking the Gemba to see what we can find in terms of safety violations or concerns. That's the point that I'm making here, is that this is iterative and it's something that's ongoing. We don't do it once and say we're done, right? Because a lot of the stuff's going to change. A lot of the stuff we don't know to even look for. And we're going to have different administrations, right? Different bosses come in. What we hopefully are going to see is that all of them, no matter their specific desires for our organization, they want to encourage participation without fear, right? And the idea behind that, right? If same in this class, it could be that I say something that's just completely wrong, right? I tell you that the moon doesn't exist or something. For the benefit of yourself and your classmates, pop your hand up and say, hey, man, you're full of shit. tell the truth, right? And you're going to want to do that because I want to create the conditions that enable you to, because it's the only way we learn. This is learning. Right? Everybody in this, that's how we should approach dealings with safety. That's how we ought to consider occupational safety and health. Everybody has a role. Everybody can benefit, but in order for that to happen, everyone has to participate, which leads to dimension 4, continuous improvement. And we're not just talking about continuous improvement of one task area or one risk area or one safety or wellness category. We're talking about continuous improvement throughout the system, right? And you'll see with these ISOs, they always talk a lot about systems. The point of a system is that it doesn't represent unidirectional activity. It represents a series of feedback loops. The other important point of a system is systems tend to be affected by and affect the environments in which they're located. Okay? So we're not just talking about a checklist, we're talking about having documentation. We're talking about recording data to measure what's working and what isn't. We're talking about having feedback loops so that we're using that data to inform design iteratively, so that we're constantly getting a little bit better, right? We're learning not just from the egregious things that happen, but we also are learning from our successes, and we're learning from near misses, right? And in order to learn from those, we have to talk openly about them, right? The biggest thing I want you to carry away as an auditor and as a thinker in this ISO is, what systems can you put in place to ensure that learning is happening? And that's where we get to the plan, do, check, act cycle as the system, right? We get to the plan, do, check, act cycle as a system. And I want to close this intro section with just a couple of questions, then we'll go on a little bit of a break, stretch our legs, come back and get into the case study. So the question I have for you first, we don't often see a health and safety department in an organization. Why is that? Because health and safety aren't specialized functions. They are things that we see throughout, right? Just like monitoring and controlling in a project is not a separate process group, because it's something that we're doing throughout. Different organizations are going to require different dimensions. A couple of people have mentioned heavy industry, manufacturing, right? Those are going to come with probably more physical concerns than a typical office job, where your physical concerns might be, say, ergonomics. So again, just because you have this ISO to guide you and the plan, do, check, act cycle to guide you, doesn't mean that you can stop and implement a generic solution. You've got to tailor your solution to the context of your organization. That's what quality means. When we talk about quality, this vague term, we're talking about, are we meeting people's expectations? Are we being accountable? Are we delivering value that satisfies the people who invest in us, right? Whether our customers or clients or stakeholders or stockholders or whomever we have to be talking about. So depending on your workplace, you might see one of these dimensions emphasized, and you might see it emphasized at the expense of another or others. So I want to leave you with a question as I send you in to stretch your legs. What's one small improvement you could make at work this week to create a healthier or safer environment? And that's not something that you have to answer, just something to think about. But Trevor says, I'm going to measure performance and I'm going to measure effectiveness. And you are right on the money. That's where we're going after the break. And just to give you a preview, we're going to talk about the plan, do, check, act cycle. And I've talked about it a couple times already. It's pretty self-explanatory. It follows the scientific method. But in planning, we're trying to address all possible sources of occupational safety and health risk and value delivery. Right? In do, we are implementing a solution to see if it works, right? We're experimenting. We're going to check that by conducting analysis of our data. And then we're going to act focused on that by using our data to reinforce our planning process so that it's iterative and we get better and better. So you're absolutely right on the money, Trevor. Let's go ahead and take 5, guys. Get back here, 8:35 or so Eastern, 7:35 or so Central. Get you a little bathroom break, stretch your legs. We'll come back and get into a case study. Any questions before we leave? All right, see you in 5-ish. All right, we'll go ahead and dig back in. We're going to get through this case study, and then we'll tell you a little bit about the exam, take the exam, and get you out of here. So you won't have too much longer with me. So we're going to go through a case study, and before we get there, just some basics to give you a little bit of an overview. And we're going to look through the case and we'll talk about those and the entirety of the ISO just in a brief overview. So the first thing that we would say is you're going to look clause by clause, and I'll go through these pretty quickly chapter wise because some of them aren't that detailed. So the first is scope. It just tells you the boundaries of the policy, right? It also includes continuous improvement in what's called the quality management system, which again is based on the plan, do, check, act cycle. The next section is called normative references. That's just going to be terminology. And the idea behind that is it provides consistency so that we can have this standard throughout the world. Okay. The third is terms and definitions. You might want to look at those through the specific ISO. They tell you what a worker is, what participation is, what a risk is, what a hazard is, and how those are different. Incident versus an accident, that sort of thing. And it also serves to clarify roles of managers and workers in other interested parties when it comes to health and safety. Okay, so that's your terms and definitions section. The next is context. And remember, we talked about context tailoring. So in this context, we're talking about a public sector contractor. Okay, the way that we develop a model to comply with ISO 45001 and related ones in the ISO 45000 family is going to be specific to this situation, right? The very first thing that stands out in your mind is that we have different levels of accountability in the public sector, right? Unlike a private sector corporation where someone can choose or not to purchase stock in your company, in the public sector, everyone is obligated to pay taxes. So you have a lot more potential for scrutiny. The way that Paul Appleby described it, he said, public administration is business administration in a fishbowl. So when we look at understanding that context, we have to get to say needs and expectations of interested parties. Well, in the public sector, that's everybody, right? And we have to find a way to align the expectations, manage those expectations to create quality while fulfilling our duties. That's the difference between accountability, managing expectations, and responsibility, fulfilling our duties. Okay. Next, we're going to determine the scope. Again, that's what's included, what's not specific to our organization. This is where we're going to establish the system and talk about the management system that we're going to use. And again, it's going to be based off of planning, experimenting, checking the results, and acting on those results. Leadership and worker participation is your next chapter. Here we're talking about top management accountability. And here we're not just talking about maintaining the status quo. In fact, as Zach mentioned at the beginning, change management is integral to ISO compliance and audit because we're going to have to change things to bring about compliance, right? We want to be able to create a culture where change is welcome, where change is something that we know is going to happen, but we're committed to it. And that's the difference between leadership and management in the context of this ISO. We're talking about leadership as having a vision for change based on improvement tied to the quality cycle. You want to get somewhere as opposed to you want to keep your operation running. Okay. Part of that is committing to injury prevention, continual improvement, compliance, and saying that you will be available to communicate about incidents related to health and safety. Okay. You're also going to have organization policies, roles, and responsibilities, as well as processes and procedures in place. That's what your auditors are going to be looking for. Do you have these in place? Right? You're going to want to show that you have consulted workers, right? And that makes sense. If you're trying to design a safe workplace, you want to talk to the people that work in the areas you are trying to make safer because they have daily experience knowing what health and safety look like in their work areas. They know what barriers exist and what can be done to remove them, right? So emphasizing two-way communication helps us to remember this isn't top down. This isn't us complying with some department or some top manager. This is us all working together to create a better working environment for all of us. Okay. You get into chapter 6, and as you'll notice, the next 4 chapters talk specifically about the plan, do, check, act cycle. So the first is planning. How do we plan? We try to take action to address risk and take advantage of opportunities. Right? We're going to consider emergency situations. We're going to consider a hierarchy of controls, and we're going to look at specific hazards and risks and their likelihood and severity. Okay? What are we trying to achieve in the planning section here? We're trying to come up with SMART objectives: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-based, that will serve as key performance indicators en route to fulfilling these goals that we have stated. Right? We're going to be answering who, what, when it comes to resources and evaluation there. 7th chapter, support. This is what we're going to do to develop training, what we're going to do to develop capacity, how we're going to inform workers of the policy, of compliance, of risk, right? So how we're going to support people in carrying out health and safety work, and also how we're going to inform people about its importance to the organization. The reason we want to bring about this awareness is so that we can then have communication. We can have people that feel like they can talk openly about health and safety concerns. And then we want documented information, right? We want to be able to say, this is what happened, this is what we did in terms of response, and here it's how it is in line with the international standard, so that when auditors come in, they can see that. We move from there to operation, right? This is implementing. And what we want to look at here is how we are planning and controlling. So are we managing our processes? Are we implementing change management based on the feedback from the PDCA cycle? Are we looking beyond our immediate workplace? Are we looking at our supply chain? Are we ensuring that there's health and safety in procurement, right? Because it doesn't do much good for us to have a healthy work environment if we are sourcing materials from people that don't practice that. Okay? That makes us complicit in creating unsafe conditions for suppliers, and in some cases, we can be held liable. Right? We want to be prepared for emergencies. So emergency preparedness is part of the 8th section. 9th is performance evaluation. This is your check in the plan, do, check, act cycle. The check is, are we using the data that we're accumulating, and is the data indicating, are the data indicating that we are indeed making this a healthier and safer work climate, right? How are we going to do that? We're going to come up with definitions of what it's going to look like to give us goals, and then we're going to have measurable objectives, and we're going to experiment with different variables we believe will have an impact on helping us to meet those objectives, right? So the scientific method. Okay. Once we have looked at how we're going to monitor, measure, and evaluate, now we want to include an internal audit. So we want to give ourselves a chance to look at areas of nonconformity. We want to give ourselves an opportunity to look at areas for improvement before an external auditor comes in and finds those, and we have to deal with sanctions, fines, or legal consequences, right? So what do we want to do? Well, we want to plan periodic audits so that we can, again, have continuous information and continuous improvement. We want our audits to be objective. In other words, we don't want people auditing their own work, because they might be likely to say, I'm doing a good job, because it's in their self-interest. And we want to make sure that management is aware and involved with those audit findings and reviews them. Okay. 10 is improvement, and this is tied to act, right? The action that we take based on the results that we have found in terms of our conformity, compliance, non-conformity, what's adding value, what's not, okay? So how are we going to integrate continuous improvement in? And that's essentially the ISO in a nutshell. That's the 50,000 foot above the ground overview. Now let's apply it to this case. So we're going to start with Apex Works. And I'll read it to you to save you the trouble, because the font's a little small. Apex Works, a public sector contractor, began its journey toward ISO 45001 certification by transforming how it viewed safety. Right? So we're talking about an organization change. We're talking about a change not just in the operations, not just in the way that we collect data, not just in the forms that we keep, not just in the records that we keep, not just the regularity with which we schedule internal audits. We're talking about transforming the organization's entire culture to prioritize health and safety, okay? To include that on the ledger sheet when it comes to value. Instead of reacting to incidents, leadership focused on building a culture of prevention. In other words, they proactively identified risks and came up with risk management strategies. It might be mitigate, right? It might be transfer. They might buy insurance. There are lots of different ways to deal with risk, but dealing with it proactively in terms of risk management is always better than dealing with it on the back end. So they used clause 4 to identify the organization's context, as we have discussed. Leaders accepted accountability under clause 5, ensuring workers were part of every safety conversation. Remember, we talked about buy-in. We talked about co-creation. If you get a seat at the table, then you're much more likely to keep coming back to the table. They created a hazard and risk register guided by clause 6.1, and it became the foundation for them planning. They evaluated physical and psychosocial risks together. So notice when we're planning, we're not having management come in and say, this is what's wrong. We're having an opportunity for co-creation, for participation throughout the organization, right? Apex Works set measurable goals for performance indicators. Why do we want them to be measurable? Because if they're not, then we have no way of knowing whether we're making progress toward them, right? Not only do we want them to be measurable, we also want them to be specific, attainable, realistic, and time-based so that we can hold ourselves accountable in all those other dimensions. Regular reviews and audits helped monitor progress, right? That's why we want those regular reviews and audits, not to punish people, not to catch people doing bad stuff. We want that, but the bad stuff anyway. But generally what we're looking for is ways to improve our operations, because we're giving folks, for the most part, the benefit of the doubt. Most people don't come in with the intention of making the workplace unsafe or creating an unhealthy atmosphere, right? A lot of it is simply ignorance or lack of perspective. And that's why we want to bring people from all over the organization in, because they are going to be in a unique position to identify areas of risk, areas of safety and well-being that might be considered, right? And notice here, the organization learned more from data than punishment, right? So this isn't to take you out and give you a lashing. Instead, it is to help everyone in the organization contribute to health and safety. Before certification, they completed a readiness review that confirmed document control, worker engagement, and audit preparedness. The final external audit verified not only procedures, but also culture. So when auditors come in, they're not just looking at whether you are following the ISO by the book or by the letter. They're looking at what you're doing to foster a culture. And that is as important as compliance, because compliance needs can shift. Culture is a lot harder to shift. Okay? Findings became opportunities for growth rather than signs of failure. And like anything else in life, we can look at our failure and say, I'm a bad person, I'm ashamed, or we can say, this is a chance for me to learn. Right? The origin of the word failure is interesting. It means to fall in Latin, but it has a very, very specific meaning. The meaning is to fall because you were impeded by an obstacle, right? So failure isn't just about you or what you did wrong. Failure is a combination of what you did or didn't do and the obstacle that was in your way, right? So what we're developing here is agility in navigating these obstacles, not shame that we failed, right? Shame doesn't get us anywhere. Agility and learning from our mistakes so we don't make the same mistakes twice, that's growth. So they achieve certification and, more importantly, a sustainable management system built on trust and shared accountability. Let me read that last clause. A sustainable, that is, we can keep this going, management system built on trust and shared accountability. That's what we're talking about. We're not just talking about falling off ladders tonight. We're talking about having the kind of culture that creates these conditions because they enable free flow of information, which in turn helps us to identify risk more easily and earlier, right? And then if you look at these tables, you can see how each of these phases and each ISO reference line up. So when you're conducting the audit or preparing for it, this is generally where you would want to look in the ISO. And in your student kit, you'll see lots of templates for compliance, for audits, for things like that. And they will expand on this very general overview. Okay. So what did we do in the case study? Let's go through it section by section. So the first thing we did, we identified context, stakeholders, and leadership responsibilities, right? So we might ask ourselves, how does stakeholder engagement strengthen compliance? What does leadership accountability look like daily? In other words, are our leaders asking us to do things that they themselves aren't doing, right? Are they applying the standards that they set uniformly throughout the organization? And most importantly, are they communicating a vision for change and allowing us to help shape it? And then how are we building openness? So we want all of this. And then our final question here in this first stage is, what would change if every employee helped define safety priorities? You're going to get different priorities from the people who drive trucks versus the people who load them versus the people who work in support offices versus the people who work from home and engage in telesales, right? So we're going to learn more talking to more people. We're going to have more breadth and depth of knowledge. When we're getting into the planning process and assessing risk, we have to ask ourselves, according to the ISO, what is going to help us to be proactive? What is going to help us to mitigate the most hazardous? Because remember, we can't account for every risk. We're trying to look at impact-based prioritization. In other words, what level of severity will this have? And how likely is it to occur? And then we're asking, how can we balance safety with productivity? And a lot of times we see these as opposing forces or dichotomous. With a quality management system in place, what we often see is that these speak the same language. They coincide with one another. And that makes sense, right? If I'm not having to stop the line to deal with somebody who's injured, or I'm not having to call the electrician to fix a fuse box that just blew, I'm going to be able to get more work done. What's cool about this is if we democratize the process of planning, we get people who aren't conducting formal inspections that notice things that we might not know to look for, right? I'm thinking of those really gross kitchen shows like Gordon Ramsay going in and telling people that their chicken's rotten and that sort of thing. We don't have to do that. We can talk before the chicken gets rotten, right? And that's the idea, is we want to smell the fridge together before the fish starts to steam, right? When it comes to training, communication, competence, remember we said we're going to give resources, we're going to give support to make this implementation happen, right? We're going to encourage people to listen. We're going to try to work on those handoffs so that we have more clear communication, we have uniform communication, or at least some consensus over important ideas or words, and we're going to establish clear feedback loops. How are we learning from one another, right? And then empowered collaboration. Your last safety meeting at your workplace, often it's one person standing in front of the room speaking instead of the people who are affected by the unsafe work conditions speaking. That's your choice as a manager. You can make that different. When it comes to internal audits and continuous improvement, think about audits as learning tools, right? The quizzes that you take before you have to sit for the exam. How to review sustained momentum? Well, it's all about strategy and all about alignment. If we are tying our audits into value creation and quality as we should be, we're going to see immediate implications for organization strategy. Okay. What does evidence-based improvement mean? And this is where I think the ISO tells us, like a lot of plan, do, check, act, and a lot of lean management, it tells us that we don't just want to fix a symptom. We want to dig down to get to the root cause. We don't want to identify a spurious variable, fix that, and have the problem still occurring. External audit and organization maturity. We're talking about the auditor is going to look to say, hey, is this commitment being demonstrated? Is there engagement on the part of every level of the organization? Is there action-oriented learning? In other words, are you taking your data and stuffing it in a filing cabinet or on an online file, or are you using that data to inform and improve your operations? So think about audits, and this sounds a little facetious, but think about them as a celebration of learning rather than compliance, or an opportunity to show the external auditor that you do in fact take this seriously and you've embedded it into your company's culture. Right? No, I wanted to ask you, and this is something you can work on your own time, but I had a three-component exercise here. One decision from your workplace that could be strengthened, one behavior that models leadership commitment, and one area to apply lessons. And again, that's going to vary for each of us because we all have different contexts. And that's why that's the very first chapter of this ISO. But this is going to give you an opportunity to see the specifics within your organization or industry or sector of the economy. Okay. And that's our case study one more time. I'm going to hit some high points on this table here. And this is mainly to help you in preparing for the exam you're about to take. So we're going to go over these sections briefly just to reinforce them. So first, context of stakeholder engagement. In our case study, Apex Works began identifying these things. It created inclusion and shared purpose. So we might look here at stakeholder engagement. Where do we see that? Clause 4 and Clause 5. What are we trying to learn here? Recognizing internal and external influences on the system and promoting worker involvement, right? What does leadership accountability look like? Well, we have a clause that tells us. How do we focus our learning on it? Through building trust. How can leadership communicate goals? We look at clause 7 and talk about open dialogue and psychological safety, especially the challenger level of psychological safety, the level where I can challenge somebody who's in a position of authority without consequences. Right? We talked about this question: what would change in your organization if everybody had a say? When it comes to risk, what we're focusing on is turning data into prevention, prioritizing based on impact and frequency. And again, that's going to go back to your context, and integrating safety with strategy. These two should not be opposing, they should be complementary. When it comes to training, we want to encourage mutual learning and peer support. So we want to learn together, which is what we're doing tonight. And you'll see that with the exam that we do in a little while. We want to use clear channels and feedback loops. And we want to empower employees to co-create solutions, because remember, they're the ones that are experiencing these health and safety issues on a daily basis. Internal audits, Again, continuous improvement, objectivity, and alignment with strategy. Notice how often you see that. We also here want to link data to root causes so that we can eradicate those root causes and improve our overall strategy. Okay. External audit, we want to demonstrate engagement and transparency. So we want the auditor to be able to see this is organization-wide. It's permeated the culture. It's something that matters to us, right? It's not just something that we say matters to us, but we have observable artifacts and assumptions, right? We have, and assumptions, I mean this in the context of Edgar Schein. He talks about having artifacts, the visible pieces of the organization, values, their stated beliefs, and then assumptions, their behavior, right? Where do we look for assumptions? If you want the quickest idea of how important something is to an organization, look at their budget document. How much are we spending in the area of safety and health compliance, right? So you can look at one decision from your own workplace that could be strengthened, one behavior that models leadership commitment, or again, one area that you want to apply these lessons to. Okay? Now I'll go over just a brief history of the ISO in wrapping up, just to tell you a little bit about how it came about and give you some contemporary implications, because this is a relatively new ISO. Before 2018, there wasn't one. There wasn't a single ISO that covered occupational safety and health. And as a result, people used OHSAS 18001, a British-based specification, right? The IOS, or the ISO, recognized the need for something broader. And notice here the name of the organization doesn't fit with the ISO, the acronym, and that's because the acronym is in French. Right? The change here was more than administrative, it was philosophical. So we're talking about buy-in, co-creation, leadership, quality, continuous improvement. We're not just talking about avoiding risk or avoiding lawsuits or having enough money to pay them off. We're talking about fundamentally altering the way that we do business. And that's big, right? What do we see ISO doing today? We see it defining what mature occupational health and safety management looks like. We see that an extension, so we talked primarily about 45,001. If we look at 45,002, another sub policy within the 45,000 family, we see implementation guidance. 45,003 talks about psychological safety, right? So at its heart, we're talking about humanity within systems. Why do we care if people are healthy and safe at work? Because they're human beings and they deserve to be. And unfortunately, we have a history in human civilization of exploiting people, of taking advantage of them, of putting them in unsafe conditions, right? We want to avoid that. We want to do better. We ought to do better. We have a moral obligation, right? So we're talking not just about responding to risk after it's happened, right? We're not talking about having an ambulance at the bottom of a cliff. We're talking about proactively preventing risk. So maybe we have a fence at the top of that cliff instead of an ambulance at the bottom, right? Part of your role going into auditing is going to be compliance coaching, right? You're going to have to be able to tell people this is what you got wrong and do it in a way that encourages them rather than discourages them. How do we do that? We co-create solutions. So a skilled compliance coach isn't somebody that's going to come in and say, hey, here are the rules. They're going to be somebody that builds understanding and helps to work with those being audited, right? We can think about audit again, not as something that we're doing because it's scary, but because we want to renew our organization, okay? And then you'll notice I mentioned at the beginning, we talked about OSHA in 45,001. OSHA is legal mandatory compliance for organizations. The ISO isn't mandatory, but it's certainly helpful, right? And these two systems reinforce one another. OSHA's recommended practices mirror the structure of the ISO, including leadership engagement, yada, 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 right? So this doesn't replace the law, but it gives you a little bit more legitimacy in claiming that This is an area that you excel in, that you have developed quality management processes for. And then there's a lot coming with safety management. There are things that we haven't seen. And the cool thing about that is no matter what comes about, we are going to have some reference material that's going to help us to deal with that situation. So we're becoming empowered tonight. And I think that's really cool. Having this toolkit on our tool belt, right? And we'll look just at a couple of different artifacts here just to show you what these would look like. We're not going to expect you to know this for the exam or write it down, but you'll probably see this in your student materials. You'll definitely see it in your work of audit. So first, a risk likelihood impact matrix. And notice here, we're listing the risks out from our risk register. We're talking about the description, the likelihood, that is, how likely is it to occur, the impact, that is, what is the severity, and then we combine those, we multiply those, and it gives us the risk level. And along with that risk level, we get recommendations. Okay. When we're talking about aligning stakeholders, we might use a simple RACI chart. We're looking at each area and saying who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. Right? Meaning we are not going to treat every group of stakeholders the same, because some stakeholders are going to be more involved. Some stakeholders are going to have more skin in the game. Some of these issues are going to be more salient for stakeholders than others, right? Let's say we want to talk about failure modes. We want to anticipate what could go wrong and develop mechanisms to account for that. We might engage in RPN calculation or failure mode effects analysis, FMEA. Okay? And how we would do that, again, is we're going to look at the severity, the occurrence, and the detection. We're going to multiply this together, and it's going to give us our risk priority number, or RPN. Okay? So that's another metric we can use alongside our risk impact matrix. And what's cool about this is it gives us a number, and that number can go into data analysis, right? How about poka-yoke, mistake proofing? What we're trying to do is anticipate things that could go wrong. If you want an example of this, think about trying to plug something in and it only goes in one way. Why is that? Well, to mistake proof, so that you know that you're going to charge. Right? How about assistive technology in our cars, right? Our backup cameras, or our side view mirrors, or our traffic analysis devices that beep at us when people are too close to us. All of that is to prevent a mistake, right? We integrate that into daily activity. We wear a seatbelt, that sort of thing. And you can see poka-yoke applied in different areas here. Okay? And then the last thing before we get to the references, how these methods support ISO, right? Pretty simple. I think you can see those ties. And with that, I will stop the share and take any final questions that we have before we go into exam mode. So what you got, guys? Anything you want? And if you have a question, it's almost guaranteed somebody else in the room has that same question. So don't be shy.
When you talked about accountability for managers, how do we ensure that the managers are actually doing what they're held accountable for, and how do we measure that? Do we do that based on incidents? Do we do it based on every time they need to do an inspection? Or because, most organizations, they oftentimes, hey, these people are coming to check this, this, and this. So now everybody's management is doing this really big push to try to make sure that we're in compliance. But then if in this audit, it says, hey, we need to see the history of, this and this and this. And then how can we authenticate the fact that that information is authentic at the time it's supposed to have happened, opposed to them generating and maybe falsifying that information?
Yeah, well, we can't eradicate evil, right? And we can't get rid of all unethical behavior. But what we can do, and what the ISO gives us the ability to do, and this goes back to clause 5, Trevor. When we're coming up with our leadership expectations, part of that is going to be accountability, and the other part is going to be responsibility. And remember, I said when we talk about those phenomenon, they're related, but they're not the same. Now, in everyday conversation, we might talk about responsibility and accountability being the same. I want us to, for the purposes of this conversation, to think about those as distinct concepts. So you're asking about accountability, and that is, how am I managing expectations? In other words, how am I meeting the expectations of the people who expect things from me, like safety or health? Right? The other thing that we're talking about, which is distinct, is responsibility. What is your duty? And what we're trying to do with this ISO is codify that accountability is part of your responsibility as a leader, right? So that, the thing is, we are developing audit protocol. The reason we're doing these internal audits periodically is so that we can sniff that stuff out and nip it in the bud. Right? Because our internal auditors, remember, they're going to be objective. So they're going to be in a position where they can tell managers that they're not being accountable, right? And they can tell them, and again, this is going to be one of those things where you can get more flies with honey than vinegar, right? So you don't want to go in and say, hey, you're a terrible manager, you're not doing this right. What you want to do is co-create solutions to improve that facet of the ISO compliance, just like you would anything else, right? So you treat it as the situation needs improvement, not the person, right? That's my very first part of advice from going into audits is the minute you make it about the situation and you let them weigh in, people love teaching. They love talking about their experiences. And if you're allowing them to talk, then they feel like you value them, you respect them, you trust them. You're not coming in and trying to punish them. Because if I feel like you're coming in to tell me I did a bad job or punish me, I might just shrink or close up, right? Brace myself for the impact and then go home and cry about it. What if instead you're telling me, hey, this is a chance for you to become a better leader. Now, notice what I'm saying here is I'm not saying you're a bad leader. I'm saying this is something you can do to become better. Right? And I would say that no matter what, no matter how many of these nights we spend in training or how many books we read or how many projects we complete, every single one of us can do better. Right? Remember, we have these ISOs because we don't have full rationality. We can't know everything that's going to happen. We can't rank order every possible risk and select the ones that are going to apply only to us. We can't predict the future. We don't need to. And that's the point of this ISO. We don't need to be able to predict the future or be superhuman. We need to be able to develop mechanisms by which we can learn to incorporate those things that we haven't included. And that's what the purpose of an audit is to show us what we're doing well and what we can improve on. So yeah, I think as long as we're writing our documentation and we're keeping our policies in line with this ISO, if we're expecting to be accredited through it, then we're going to see a lot more transparency through each stage of the process, right? Especially at planning. So that stuff that you're talking about, Trevor, managers who are fudging numbers or retroactively doing reports, that's going to come up in the planning process if you have created adequate psychological safety. And that's definitely going to come up when an auditor from the outside comes in. And that's why we have external audit, so that people can say, hey, I'm going to blow the whistle on some things that aren't happening that are in line with this ISO's expectations, right? And we ought to know that that's one thing we have at our disposal no matter what. When we see an occupational safety and health violation, if we don't see it being addressed, we should feel an obligation to let somebody know. We should blow the whistle. Right? And we have a lot of whistleblower protection laws in place for that very reason, so that we don't end up with a situation like the Challenger shuttle in 1986 that blows up in midair because there was pressure to get it in the air, despite scientists knowing that the O-rings couldn't withstand the drastic temperature drop overnight in Florida. So Sorry for the 30-minute dissertation in response to your question, but that's an important question, right? Because we can talk all day about creating a safety culture, but if our leaders aren't practicing, if they're not showing that and doing their part in keeping documentation and trying to improve themselves, it becomes a little difficult for them to look at us on the front line and say, you should be doing this, right? And I think that's true for any leadership situation. We shouldn't ask
Yeah.
our employees to do something we're not doing, right?
That's true. And then also, if they were to, like you said, fudge the documentation, it's going to definitely show in the past incidents that has occurred during that timeline as well. So it's like a check and
Right.
balance system. If you said this was great, but then this happened during the same timeline, then how was these things, were followed? How was these policies followed? You know
That's
what
a
I mean?
great point, Trevor.
That
And I
kind of
think
thing.
what you're getting at there is the idea that we have common metrics so that we're able. And remember, part of planning is coming up with KPIs, key performance indicators that will enable us to gauge objectively whether we are approximating the outcomes that we want. Thomas, you had your hand up. I believe Dwight was before you. So give me 1 second and let's go with Dwight. If you still have a question, jump in here. If not, we'll go to Thomas.
No, no question. I was applauding the conversation because in most
Same.
organizations, yeah, you have these metrics you're supposed to be abiding by, and then that top level leadership, whether it's corporate level, operational level, and then down to the end user, it is very important to measure and see how we're doing in the organization.
Absolutely. And I think what you're driving at, Dwight, is numbers are numbers, right? They're symbols. That's all they are, right? That's all they are. And so if we're not careful, we can get caught up in looking at our KPIs and patting ourselves on the back and not seeing outcomes because we're not tying the right key performance indicators, right? So, and I see this a lot with audit. I see this a lot with general public, nonprofit, and private organizations. It's a phenomenon that's related to what we call goal displacement, where you become so focused on following the rules that takes the place of fulfilling your mission, right? We don't want that. We don't want to paralyze people with fear. And that's why we have this ISO, so that we can create a way for you as a unique organization to create value and satisfy stakeholder requirements in a standardized way. And that gives back to Trevor's point, it's more difficult to fudge numbers when we use standardized metrics like an RPN or a risk likelihood matrix that are going to be things that are done industry wide, right? Our competitors are going to have similar risk priority numbers and risk likelihood matrices. And so it's going to be pretty easy for us to see if those are being followed. And I think that's the last point I would make there is a lot of times what we want to do is benchmark. So we want to look at other organizations and what they're doing, especially ones that are in our area. I would say be careful there, right? We're not trying to go in and say, this is how they did it. We have to do it exactly the same because context still matters. And that's why I don't ever say best practices. If you can dispel yourself of any phrase, get rid of best practices from your vocabulary. What we can talk about is practices that tend to work, or good practices, or things that are industry innovations. And I think if we can look at that as having some good practices, we can also use that as the basis for stretching out. So the idea behind that is you have your vegetables on your plate, so you can stretch out and get a little dessert because you know that you have a nutritious meal. And if you have a nutritious meal in this context, if you have a safe work culture, you're going to know that it's okay to try and fail because you're not going to be fired or beaten up or thrown off a cliff, right? I think that's just as important as some of the other stuff that we talk about. Thomas Stephen Brandt, you had something to say, sir.
No, I'm good. I was just applauding and thanking you for the class. That's all.
Oh, thank you for coming. Other questions before we get into exam mode? And I'll just give you a little bit of a window here. For the exam, the link is included in your student file. You have the option of your lead auditor or internal auditor, I believe, is your option. So I would suggest you go with the lead auditor because it gives you more leeway in what you can do with it. You can train, instruct, get people certified as internal auditors, that sort of thing. And once you have registered for it, this is where a couple of things have to be stressed. Okay. And I'm not doing this to be ugly. I'm doing this because I want to make sure you don't miss out. When you fill your registration form out, make sure that the address that you use is the one where you receive mail, right? Specifically where you will be receiving mail in about a week, because Zach is going to be putting the book that he showed you in physical mail, right? Like Santa Claus, he's going to send it to you. You're going to get like something that you can hold. It's pretty wild to think about, because most of the time we get digital documents these days, but he's going above and beyond. He's giving you something you can carry around, man. And the cool thing about having that is you can have it in your bag anytime you go into an audit, and if you get stuck, you're never alone. You've got Zach. You've got somebody who's done this for years and has a lot of experience, right? So make sure that your address is properly recorded. Make sure that you select the appropriate exam. I would encourage you to do lead auditor. There's another 45,001 selection that you could make if you want. And once you're registered, we'll give you a minute to get that knocked out and move on to the exam itself. And everybody's got the registration link, I believe. Is that correct?
I see that there's a QR code in the, well, actually, did you drop? No, you didn't drop it in the chat, did you?
I think Zach might have put it in earlier.
Because there's a QR code on the updated courseware for 4,500. But is this also too? I was going to ask you, with regards to the other lead auditor course that we just did, this is going to be a different certification, right?
So are you talking about the 9001, Thomas?
Yes.
Yeah. So now I can understand why you're asking that, and you'll see this with a lot of ISOs. I'm guessing what you saw is, oh my gosh, we talked about the plan, do, check, act cycle. We did that
Right.
last week when we were talking about, well, so remember that in this ISO, we have a QMS, a quality management system. That's the plan, do, check,
Right.
act cycle. And it is universal in, I believe, almost every ISO, because it's how we, first off, well, plan, how we do it, how we check it, how we act. So this process of planning, then implementing small experiments, getting feedback and using that feedback to improve, that's something that we see generically throughout ISOs. So that idea of quality management, we think of it with 9001 because that's the one that explicitly talks about organization quality management. But all of this stuff is rooted in lean. All of it's rooted in the work of Dr. Deming. And so at the end of the day, we're talking about quality as our chief variable. And the way that I understand it, and this might be a little bit weird, and there might be some people that scratch their heads here, but it's kind of like when you dress up for Halloween, right? So tonight we're talking about a costume that looks like occupational safety and health. We might be talking about a costume next week that looks like data management and cybersecurity. Right. So these are all different application areas of the same general idea. We want to be able to account for the things that we're going to encounter as risks and turn those into opportunities through learning iteratively and continuous improvement. Right. So yeah, this is distinct. And what you'll notice is that when you're delivering training, when you're teaching, when you're conducting the audits, you're going to have more specific topic-specific areas you're working in with safety and health. But you're going to see that backbone. And that's what I really think is cool about these ISOs, is that backbone is always there, right? If you aren't sure what you're doing with an area, you can always fall back on the plan, do, check, act cycle. Does that help you?
It does. Confused? Thank you. And I'm actually just
okay.
got the link. I'm just going to go ahead and post it into the chat here.
Yes, please. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And then we'll open this real quickie and go through it and just see if anybody is having any trouble registering. We haven't dropped the link yet. Would you mind doing that, Thomas? Because I had the QR code link, but I don't know if that'll get us very far. Exam link. All right, let's take just a couple minutes. I'm going to get the link to you. If you already have it, go ahead and start registering. I'm going to dig it up and put it in chat, and then we'll do registration. Give it a few minutes to make sure everybody's registered, and then we'll sit for the exam as a group and go through it so that we can practice some of this co-creation that we've talked about. So give me 1 second. I'll pull that in the chat. And again, if you want to use this as a chance to stretch your legs one last time before you sit for the exam, it's a great opportunity. All right, my Thomas Brandt in Shining Armor has posted the link here, and I'm gonna go ahead and share the screen so we can go through it just in case there are any questions about the registration process. And we're here. Okay, so what is your full name? That's the one your mom gave you, the one that's on your driver's license, passport, etc., etc. Email, don't use company or government ones. Address, again, this is where you're going to be to receive the book. And Zach usually mails them about 72 hours, within about 72 hours of the class. So think about next week where you would be. Phone number, and then this is going to be your registration for lead auditor. You can donate to Star Global if you like, sign here, pay here. And once you are done paying,
Yeah, and just letting you guys
you'll
know
get your
too, as you
exam
guys go down,
link.
as you go down and you go to scholarship registration, you have two different options. You can choose, click on that case. You
Yep.
can choose the health and safety manager one, or those of you that, as I talked about earlier, if you want to become a lead auditor, I'm only going to mail the books to the lead auditor. As I said, the books I'll have to put in the order tonight. They take a couple days to get to me, and like I said, they should be back to you within a couple weeks. You'll choose the lead auditor, or you'll choose the health and safety manager. All right, Casey, go ahead.
That was it. So once you've made your choice, get registered, do your pay thing, and we'll be sitting for the exam as a group once everybody has access.
Are we doing this exam open book? So let me rephrase it. Are we doing this exam as a class or as a group, or is this going to be individual effort?
I would like to do it as a group, and the reason for that is we talk a whole lot about co-creation. We talk about teams. We talk about creating conditions where we're talking to one another. Well, this is a pretty good opportunity, right? So I think we practice what we preach, and we co-create value here. And this isn't to make it less rigorous, it's to make it more participative, because in the real world, when you're conducting these audits, you're going to be part of an audit team, right? No person is an island, so we're going to be working on it together. Now, if you don't want to work on it together, you prefer to work on it independently, you're welcome to do that as well. I would just say, if you have the chance to work on it with classmates that you can learn from that have a lot of different experience, it might make sense.
Yeah, and make sure you guys, when you're putting your address in, you put an accurate address because these books, I'm only sending one shot to you. If you put the wrong address or you misspell your address, logistically that kind of creates a little bit of barrier. So make sure you guys put the correct address in there, and yeah, you guys should be good.
Yeah, and if you have any questions that come up after this training, I think sometimes for me, in the moment, I'm still kind of chewing on stuff, getting it digested. So it might be that you say, "Oh, shoot, I wish I would have asked Casey this question yesterday, whatever." Reach out and let me know. I'll do anything I can to help you. If you want to explore industry specific applications, anything like that, just give me a yell. I'm pretty easy to talk to. All right. Anybody else waiting for the exam? If you're not doing the exam, then you can be excused, and we'll just stick around with folks that are knocking the exam out so we can get that out of the way. And does anybody need more time to register?
Yeah, just give them a couple minutes. That way we can come back, and then if they haven't registered, um, we'll push them out, and then we can take the exam.
That sounds good. And do you care to go ahead and get that exam ready to screen share? You're the best.
Oh, on my end.
Yeah. I just don't have a
Um,
copy of it, and I don't want to pay
uh,
you.
I understand. It's okay, buddy. Okay, okay. Let me do this. I don't think the exam's really that hard.
Sure. Can you
Here,
hear us now?
here you
You
go,
mentioned in
Casey.
chat that you couldn't hear us, Stuart.
One thing I like about this, Casey, is, essentially we're opening the gateway to a career for these individuals, right? And I don't know, just it's a lot of it's going into a company and having the ability to say, hey, I'm an auditor in health and safety. Hey, I'm an auditor in
Yeah.
quality management systems. It
Well,
shows a test.
I'll tell you the truth, man, and this is something like we can stop the recording, I think, right?
Oh yeah, there you go.